Alrighty, welcome to FLIRT on Thursday. Today we have Dr. Mery Perez, who is an adjunct professor with the School of Science and Environment and the coordinator for the Center of Research and Innovation with the Offices of Engagement and Research at Grenfell campus. And she's here to talk about best practices and engaged research. So I'll hand it over to Mery for that. Just as a couple of housekeeping things, if you have any questions, if you're here on WebEx or if you're on Facebook, you can just put those in the chat or ask them live on WebEx after Mery's presentation. I'll let you go ahead then.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you for inviting me. And I think my favorite thing about doing these presentations is that they're light and informal. So, I just wanted to give you a brief note of what to expect today. So I'll keep it light and informal. And my sharing with you today is going to be more of a reflection on some of what my research has produced and also some of what my practice, I suppose, of engagement has taught me. And I'm I'm a scholar who's at the very earliest stages of her work, so I am by no means an expert, but I do want to share with you some of what I have heard from communities, some of what I have heard from faculty and students as well. So I'll keep it more on a reflection side versus the formal analysis. And I'll talk to you about, exploring that question of what is engaged research and why do we do it as a university? Why do we do it as people involved in this, business of learning, so to speak? And I hope to share with you some of the best practices that I have encountered. A brief introduction about me. I hold a PhD in rural studies, and I obtained that at the University of Guelph. And I have spent the last year at Grenfell campus. I came to Grenfell, I came to Newfoundland from Ontario as a postdoctoral research fellow in public engagement, and I worked with Dr. Kelly Vaughton and Dr. Garrett Richards for this past year. And the project actually was very interesting, the research project. It was a partnership with a couple of community entities. So it was a partnership with the CBDC North Tip, so the community-based development corporation, and the Grossmorn Cooperating Association. And the project basically set out to ask people who had engaged Grenfell campus and ask members from the campus their feedback and their experience of engagement. So some of the good things and some of the not so good things that they had experienced when it came to engage research and engage projects. And I'll be sharing with you some of those findings. And finally, as of August of this year, I have been working as a coordinator of the Center for Research and Innovation at Grenfell campus. So I want to talk to you about, what is engaged research? So the first definition that I want to share with you is that it's an inquiry. So we're looking for answers, and it's a systematic process. So it is research. So engaged research is that rigorous approach to learning and to finding answers to our questions. And it's inquiry that is guided by certain principles. So when you have something that is engaged, you're looking at relations of reciprocity. You're looking also at long-term relationships, and you're looking at inquiry that is relevant to the external places and entities like communities and perhaps government or even other institutions. And when I talk about inquiry, we're talking about seeking answers and solutions, and also we're talking about following ethical and methodological procedures, right? Because we're talking about rigorous research in this context. I also want to add a very, very important point that engaged research looks very different depending on the discipline that you are coming from, right? So if you are a natural scientist, you're going to engage the public in research in a very different way than if you are a social scientist, for example. So I am a social scientist, and the questions I ask, the things that I consider when I go to a community will be different than, perhaps somebody who's a chemist. I do see Jeff on the WebEx link here, and some of the conversations we have had, are oriented precisely because he comes from a chemistry background. So moving forward a little bit, I want to give you Memorial University's definition of public engagement. Obviously, that's where I'm coming from, and that's where I've done my work, and that's where most of the academics and the public that are joining this conversation today, that's where they come from, right? Or that's the interaction that they have been involved in. So public engagement at Memorial encompasses collaborations between people and groups within Memorial and people and groups external to the university. So we're not talking about internal relations, but we're talking about relations of university community with anybody who's not within that entity. So public engagement relates to those collaborations that help us as a university further our mission. And we're drawing on the knowledge and resources brought by all involved. We're talking about public engagement involving mutual respect, mutual contributions, and mutual benefits for all participants. And I want to highlight, so it may sound a bit one-sided for me to tell you that public engagement basically means how we as a university collaborate so that we fulfill our mission, right? And I want to highlight that Memorial's University, our mission is to favor or to help our province, to help our communities and industries flourish, right? So as a university, we have that strong commitment to the public and to the communities in which we exist. And I also want to highlight that when we're talking about engaged research, we're actually talking about something that belongs to a bigger whole or a bigger picture. So engaged research is only one side of the coin or the whole picture. We're talking of the broader public engagement definition and understanding, which includes the engaged research. It has to also include engaged teaching and service as well, so service to the community. And when you take that whole together, that's when we're talking about public engagement. And we artificially divide up these sections, but they all come together. When you're talking to the academics who become involved in engaged research, they bring it also into the teaching, they bring it to the classroom, and it also informs how they make contributions to the communities. So why engage research? So you may, in a couple of slides, I'm going to share a couple of quotes and comments that I have heard through my work, through my research about engagement. And most of the time, people were telling me about how much effort engaged research takes. So most of the time it takes more time, probably more money, and you could very easily just do your own research without connecting, and that's also that's great. And it's as academics, as people involved in this process of inquiry and learning, there are times when we need to do research that is not engaged. But why should we, or why are some sectors interested in doing engaged research? So I'm going to suggest that engaged research makes us as a university find that place in our society that responds or that informs who we are. So specifically when it comes to Memorial University, it helps us remain relevant to our communities. It helps us remain in connection with our communities. But I also want to introduce you to a model, and I'm sure many of you have heard about this model. It's the quadruple helix, and it's a model that looks at how knowledge is produced in society, right? So you see that four aspect diagram there. And if you look at society as a whole, you look at how knowledge is produced and how we innovate as a society. You have academia, so that would be Memorial University in the case in Newfoundland. You also have industry as as an element or a sector that can contribute to knowledge production, you have government and you have civil society as a whole. And when we innovate as a society, I guess the sweet spot or the best spot of how innovation or how knowledge is created is when all of those intersect. So as an entity, as a university, feeding into that process of knowledge, we do that through engaged research and also through other aspects and other ways of doing research, but in a special way through engaged research, because when we do engaged research, we're actually looking for answers in a very strong relationship of collaboration. I can move to my next slide here. So I want to share with you some of the lessons that I have learned. And again, as I mentioned, I am not an expert in the area, but I have had the privilege of speaking to people who are experts in the area. As I mentioned, the 1-year research on public engagement at Grenfell, and also some of my personal experience and personal practice. And I've asked the question to various groups, whether it's through my teaching or the research, how do you define engagement? And most of the times, the one word that you get is relationships. And engagement is, when it comes to engaged research, it's a relationship that is sort of outlined or governed by very specific boundaries and characteristics, right? So if you go back to that quadruple helix, we're talking about engagement, academia, industry, civil society, and each one of those relationships is you're not going to relate to the government in the same way that you relate to industry, or in the same way you relate to civic organizations, right? So I'm going to approach a government official, or I'm going to approach a government project in a different way. So different boundaries, different characteristics. And I also want to add that when we're dealing with these relationships, we must not forget the fact that we're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with people who have histories and backgrounds, and who also exist within specific contexts, right? So that takes me to my next slide. And I want to share with you a couple of quotes of, so what are people saying about engaged research? So one of my, the participants in my research, somebody from Grenfell campus said to me, Mary, as excited as I am about engagement, there are always challenges. I think I'm probably safe to say that in every case, in every initiative that I've been involved in, it's a lot of work. So as I mentioned to you, engaged research is not easy, because you need to be relating to your audience, you need to be relating to the communities and to the entities that you're collaborating with. And the community member actually share with me the next quote. That person said, I think that there are a lot of benefits that can be gained on all sides through public engagement. I think universities and researchers get to explore new areas, new avenues of research or application of research that may be innovative approaches that they haven't thought of before. So 2 things here: engagement will take more work, but overall, we can all benefit from all of that. I also want to show you this diagram, and this is basically a diagram that I kind of extracted from Memorial University's public engagement framework. And I also want to kind of lead the way into this slide through a quote that, again, something that a community member shared with me. And that person said to me, you can't really engage, you can't engage truly if it is not if it is an unequal relationship. So basically, for us to be engaging with others, with entities, all those entities that I mentioned, there has to be a relationship of trust. And that trust opens our pathway toward this mutual exchange that I was telling you about. So through trust, I can, have mutual contribution with my communities or my industry partners. Through trust, I can open that way to mutual benefits, mutual skill exchanges, mutual knowledge and mutual expertise. So this aspect and this idea is key to us approaching engaged research. You know, I am not going to come to an industry partner or a community partner assuming that I know it all, right? I need to approach this knowing that, you know what, this is a circular relationship. I hold knowledge. You know what? My industry partner or my community partner also holds knowledge. They're experts. Well, first of all, they're experts in knowing how to live in a specific context or knowing how to operate a business, for example, within a specific industry. So some themes that I've kind of drawn from my conversations with the public and with the members of the Memorial University's campuses is that actually specific Grenfell campus is that context is important when you come to engage people. So if you're engaging, you know, somebody in Labrador, somebody in the Northern Peninsula or in St. John's, you're going to have very different contexts. So as researchers, we need to get to know that context. We need to ask ourselves, so who are we engaging here? Where are we engaging them and when? So what's the history? What have these communities, have these industry partners had communication or other relationships with university partners? So it's important for us to become aware of that. And know also that is your industry, maybe your industry partner is a company that's well established and that maybe is experiencing changes, drastic changes, or maybe it's a new industry, an emerging industry. Again, you're going to engage with them differently. And a very important aspect when it comes to communities, especially, again, what is the history? Especially, for example, if we're dealing with indigenous communities, what is the history of colonialism, or how have they experienced? Have their knowledge systems been respected? And we need to be aware of that. And also, who are the leaders in these communities, and who are the leaders in the industry in the industry sector as well? That's also something that we need to keep in mind. And I also like to mention that in a lot of the conversations that I've had, listening is crucial when it comes to engagement. So we need to listen for, especially with communities, what are some of the values, what are the concerns, hopes, and dreams? As I mentioned, we're dealing with human beings, and human beings who operate out of values, out of human beings in communities that have hopes and dreams. And I'm reminded of when I was interviewed for my position as a postdoc. One of the industry partners that interviewed me said during the interview, when we create healthy businesses, we create or we promote healthy communities as well. So, we are dealing with human beings, even if we're dealing with industry. Obviously, that experience of the human person may be filtered through the industry and through that operation, so to speak. But we're also dealing with elements that are central to creating healthy and sustainable communities. Listening also means bringing an attitude of openness toward knowledge systems. And especially, again, when we're dealing with indigenous communities, I'm reminded of the Mi'kmaq perspective of what is called two-eyed seeing. And those of you who are more familiar with that epistemology or that approach to knowledge, two-eyed seeing is this indigenous belief I guess it would be belief that Western science or Western approaches to knowledge are not to dismiss indigenous knowledge, but both knowledges complement each other, and we actually see better when we can look out both eyes. So again, when we engage our communities, we're exchanging that knowledge, and we need to have a positive attitude. We need to have an open attitude when it comes to those knowledge systems. And we also need to be listening for what are some of the ways in which these communities or these partners see solutions to the problems that they're facing. Another major theme that has come up in my research and the conversations with community, especially community partners, is this idea of accountability. So one of the community participants said to me, people expect engaged research to actually accomplish something. And this person said it never does, because it's just a report on the shelf. Then that's a negative. There has to be a follow-up and a way for the people to use the information. So this issue of accountability is, it can be complex, because oftentimes, when you have a researcher, doing data collection, doing analysis, there has to be this aspect of respect to the knowledge that they have produced. However, when you're producing this knowledge in the relationship with your communities, in relationship with your partners, if we go back to that two-way street, that two-way arrow, that circular relationship, we need to close the circle, right? We need to have accountability. Are we really delivering back to the community, back to our industry partners, what we said we would? And, this idea of leaving a report on a shelf, um, just really stayed with me. How do we not leave that knowledge on the shelf? It's valuable knowledge. As researchers, we have an incredible contribution to make. And you know what? We haven't arrived that knowledge by ourselves, but we actually engage communities. We gather the knowledge from these individuals, these partners, these members from society. And again, this idea of continuity. Again, a community participant said to me, when you have good relationships and well-engaged research, good things happen and there's continuity. But when that person, the person that engages with communities and partners, goes away, when that student is finished, then what happens? I think of excellent research that I've come across at Grenfell campus, people who really invest themselves in communities, and oftentimes communities grieve when that person either retires, when that student graduates, or when that faculty member moves on to another role. As researchers, as people who really care about our communities, it's important to keep that connection. If we have to move on, then who's going to stay, or who's going to follow up? And I think, again, I highlight this fact that we're dealing with individuals, we're dealing with human beings, and we form those bonds, and we need to keep aware and keep sort of that in mind, that our communities, hopefully, if we've done a good job, have become attached to us, right? So how do we give continuity so that it's not just that one personal relationship, but that it's actually bigger than us? So again, these are more reflective, more light and informal than an academic analysis here. But some of the final thoughts here is that, engaged research situates us within our specific context. So our communities, the industries that feed knowledge into our regions. And it helps us fulfill that mission. And engaged research, remember, makes part of that bigger whole. Engaged learning, engaged service. It is part of that bigger picture of engagement. And it is a relationship that demands effort. It will demand more time, and it'll demand trust from communities, and trust also on our side. We need to trust our communities and trust our industry partners as well. It requires attention to context, requires that we listen, and that we be accountable, and that we provide continuity, and that engaged research can and should be beneficial. It should be a beneficial relationship for all of us. And I am happy to take any questions you may have. Again, feel free to, as Jennifer said, leave the questions in the chat if you are joining us through Facebook, or if you're joining us through WebEx, feel free to share your questions there. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll pass it over to Jen or anybody who may have questions.
Awesome. Thanks. I am here. So I looking at Facebook, I don't see any questions. I have a number of questions, of course.
Absolutely.
But if anyone has questions here online, please go ahead and ask those.
Can I ask one?
Yes, go ahead, Kelly. I'm looking
Thank
at
you.
you.
Thank you very much, Mary. That was excellent. It's great to hear about the results of that research and looking forward to hearing more. Did you hear, I was just curious, were the perspectives that you heard from either different subregions? I know you met with people in different areas of the Western region, or from different kinds of stakeholders? Did you hear different messages from community versus industry, or were there any differences in the kind of messages you were hearing?
Yeah, so I can't say that I have enough of an analysis yet of the differences of the regions. But if I was to answer that quickly in the overall glimpse that I've gotten, I would say that usually our industry partners are happier with our continuity. So we usually go back to our industry partners, whereas communities, oftentimes they were like, highlighting the fact that oftentimes university can come in and kind of take whatever we need and then not come back to engage them with our results. Obviously, there are exceptions, and they did mention exceptions, exceptional, I would say, researchers and students. But overall, I think communities, and I'm going to say communities in the Northern Peninsula were a bit not critical, because they all love the engagement with Memorial, but a little bit more wishing that they were able to see the results of our findings.
They want to see more of us or more regularly, and that follow
Yes.
through.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Yeah, I got a question. Over the years, done some work on the Northern Peninsula, and one of the things that actually a paper Kelly and I wrote, we talked about the fact that resources that different, in the context of quadruple helix, it seems like civil society and the businesses are sort of not as able to engage, don't have the capacity. The university might not have as much as it would like, but it's pretty well resourced relative to some of those groups, and government certainly has capacity. But what do you like in order for that systematic interaction to work and to sort of bear the kind of fruit that you see in the literature? You need capacity across all the partners. And I don't. Do you have any thoughts on what, if anything, can be done about that?
Yes, thank you, Ken. So that actually became quite obvious in some of the interviews that I carried out, that because the university or the researcher comes in, they already have money usually. Usually when a researcher reaches out to a community, they tend to do it because they put in an application and there's a dollar figure attached to it, right? So I'm going to say that sometimes, most of the time, that money that is already attached to a project kind of creates this potential imbalance when it comes to the decision making and that capacity for the research. So I would say that some of the feedback that I got and that I've encountered is that when you involve your partners, and I'm obviously, as a social scientist, I'm mainly engaged. I have engaged primarily communities more than industry. But with communities, what I have been hearing is that if you come to the community and you engage these leaders and partners in the conceptualization of the proposal and the writing and the inquiry, that capacity is usually better built, because you're sharing knowledge on, well, first of all, how to write an application, what is the problem that we're dealing with. So there's that capacity building aspect when you engage from the very, very beginning. And I'm thinking of conversations with Kellyanne Butler from the Aboriginal Resource Center, and Brady Reed, who's done incredibly engaged projects, and thinking of also, I know Jeff was on the call, Jeff Rayner, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name, but when these are research that I'm aware of, and there's so many more at Grenfell campus that coming together with those partners, with industry partners, community partners, can help ease that disparity. So I don't know if I fully answer your question. I'm going with the FLIRT talk of light and informal versus serious analysis.
That's great. Thanks.
Perfect. We have one question on Facebook, and then I see Doreen has a question here. So Stephen Decker on Facebook asked, have you seen evidence of how engaged research has fostered social learning, the establishment of standalone community-based initiatives in the communities that were engaged well?
So can you read that again, Jen? I was thinking of the beginning of the question before you finished. So Go ahead.
Yeah. So have you ever seen evidence of how engaged research has fostered social learning, like the establishment of standalone community-based initiatives in the communities that were engaged well?
Yes. So, one of my first interviews, when I moved from Ontario, I was talking to a couple of partners, and they were very, very strong about the process of, I'm trying to generally answer the question without giving like too many specifics, but involving the communities that live in a specific region and being aware of the history of, for example, fisheries and the fishermen or people in the fishing industry, for example. And I guess I'm trying to find like a general way of answering that. And I guess in summary, I would say that projects that have looked at that history, projects that have drawn out the specific cultural knowledge of a specific place, tend to become self-sustaining, tend to become social learning initiatives that remain even after people have moved on, right? So in many of the conversations that I had with community partners, they talked about also that, as a university, we need to gradually transition. So if we've had somebody who's been excellent doing something and has engaged communities, that we don't just, take them out and replace them with something that comes from the top down, but actually that we keep that conversation that was already initiated.
Awesome, thanks. And then Doreen here asked, she says, first of all, she says, thanks for the talk, very interesting. And she says, any advice on the follow through? Like, how do you help a report move off the shelf and into good use?
So Doreen, that's been, and I think that's kind of like an ongoing struggle and battle that we all have, right? But I think if we go back to the initial stages of a project, and if we're collaborating from the very, very beginning, and if we can write into that project a final step or an ongoing step of accountability, continuity, I think we can do better, right? So if we are thinking from the very beginning, okay, I'm going to co-produce this knowledge, but then how is that going to be circular? How is that going to be informative, or how will that be beneficial? And also, writing to that project, what could some additional projects be based on what the findings are? So again, it takes more time. It takes more time to write a proposal with the partner, with an external entity. But I think we all benefit from that co-writing process, that co-creation process, and again, just factor it into the design of the project itself.
Awesome. That's a great answer. And I actually have a question that kind of leads from that, which is I was in a call earlier today about, and we talked about research fatigue, and that there's some areas that they get a lot of research, like researchers coming and asking questions. We see this a lot with Indigenous groups specifically, where people are asking questions, but they never see that final report. They're never seeing that follow through. But because they had never seen that follow through, they maybe are hesitant to engage further. So how do we bring them back in? Because now they're like, well, I don't want to deal with you. You've never done anything for me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes. So I think, it goes back to that idea of history, right? So what has this specific history of, collaboration been, or lack of collaboration? So have people been burned in the past? And, I think of, again, going back to that idea that we are individual, we're human beings who can build rapport. And maybe it'll take you that extra time as a researcher or as a Memorial University or Grenfell campus researcher or person, community member. It'll take you more effort, perhaps, and it'll take that building of trust. And sometimes that is done through, sitting with a community partner or an industry partner, having a cup of coffee or another type of beverage. But, it sometimes is that personal touch that may buy you that trust that may have been lost, right? So sometimes we can talk all we want, and as a researcher, I worry about that too, right? I'm talking about engaged research. How have I been accountable? And it's a daily challenge, right? So how can I be accountable so that I perhaps can do the things that I'm learning have not been helpful.
No, that's awesome. That's actually that's a great answer to the questions. That's great. Just some comments that I'm seeing here come up is Jeff had a comment, was he had a good point about the sensitivity, Mary, and he said one of the things that he mentioned is it's offensive to Labradorians to identify ourselves as Memorial University of Newfoundland or MUN. Much better to say, use Grenfell Campus Memorial University, because that of Newfoundland can cause a problem.
Absolutely, and I think it's very easy for us to become self-centered and to think, I am in Newfoundland, so I'm going to be thinking about Newfoundland. But as a province, we have an entire complementarity when it comes to our geography. We're dealing with the mainland, we're dealing with Labrador, the big land, and we're dealing with Newfoundland. And it's very easy, I think, as individuals to get lost into our current context, disregarding the reality of people who are also part of our collective, so to speak. But yeah, excellent point, Jeff.
Yeah, and I was like, just to add to that, I was on a call last night we were talking about COVID, and one of the things that we talked about was like that individuality. It's like, well, my rights as an individual, but like, what point do you think of your rights as impacting your community? So like, we talked like the mask usage as an example, but like we can talk about that in terms of research, right? And like, how can my individual research interests impact my community as we go forward?
Absolutely. Hi, Paige. So Jen's daughter is there. So yes, absolutely. So as researchers, as members of that diagram that I showed you, where engaged scholarship has that engaged research, engaged learning, and service. It's not one-sided, and it's everything, every aspect of that circle or that tri-centric circle, so to speak, influences each other. And the same thing is true about ourselves within the specific context within our province. And what we do on one side will influence the other. The same thing as that, what I do in my research will influence how I teach and how I serve communities, right? So absolutely.
I'm not seeing any other questions here on Facebook. Does anyone have any questions here on WebEx? No, I have another one. No. So I was just mentioning COVID. So COVID has really changed our minds about engagement. Like, it really has altered how we do engagement at this point. Do you have any tips for how we can continue to engage in a more more online environment now?
Yes, actually, Jen, that's an excellent question. So I am involved in a couple of COVID-related projects. And, you know, I think we all experience, I think going back to this idea of context. So the COVID reality in Corner Brook has been very different than the COVID reality in Northern Peninsula, for example, or in St. John's. And I think in the summer, we all got into a very comfortable kind of routine of, watching it from a distance. But I had applied for an accelerator fund with a couple of community partners in the Northern Peninsula back in December, and we had to postpone the project. And I know, Jen, you've been involved in that. We had to postpone the project because it involved physically going to the Northern Peninsula, bringing students, sharing knowledge, and then coming back. And back in March, we thought, that would be extremely irresponsible. So things got pushed back. And, we had been continuing the conversation with the community partners. So Mildred Labors and Nicole Bercy up in Port Saunders. And in the summer, again, I kept talking to them because I was thinking, oh my goodness, here we have these funds and we are not doing anything with them. And this project that we co-created together, or we dreamt of this project together, and there's the money sitting on the shelf. And the conversations with them showed that in the Northern Peninsula, at least this specific community needed and wanted to connect. They wanted to connect in person. So a very different reality from us in Corner Brook, where we're okay connecting online, but connecting online in rural Newfoundland, and I'm sure in other areas of rural Canada, is not a very, very rewarding experience, to say the least. It's frustrating. You connect and the video starts cutting off, or you drop the communication. So for us to do something online wasn't appropriate, even though that was my initial suggestion. So we actually did follow all the protocols and took extra paperwork and all that nice stuff. And we actually brought up a number of graduate students and faculty members, and we had that knowledge exchange. And, it was a breath of fresh air to be able to connect with the communities very cautiously, very carefully, and respectfully of the fact that if we brought something up the coast with ourselves, it would not be good. So again, that idea of asking, talking, looking at the context, and looking at the needs and the capacity that we had to make those adaptations to the project. But yes, COVID has brought in, I'm not going to say additional problems, because I think the challenge of connectivity has been there, and other challenges, but it's magnified them, and it has brought hopefully our attention to them, and hopefully we're going to be seeing changes in the future. As an optimist that I am, I do think that positive things will come.
Yeah, no, exactly. I completely agree. I think we're going to be able to dismantle some of those structures that were in place before and do it better. Like, the Universal Broadband Fund of the federal government, that was a longer term goal, and now they're pushing it forward faster. And COVID, put them to that reality more. Awesome. I'm not seeing any other questions here or on WebEx. So we're going to end the talk a little early, but thank you so much, Mery, for being here. And this is part of Memorial University's Research Week, and so great to talk about engaged research. It's a big mandate of our university, so it's awesome. And our offices, of course, to do this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I also want to thank everybody who engaged with me and answer my questions when it came to the research. I wouldn't have gathered all the expertise and knowledge, faculty members, students, community members. They're an incredible source of knowledge that we can all benefit from. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Mery. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.